And in a world where the U.S. House of Representatives is contemplating a budget that would cut billions of dollars from SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, and other nutrition assistance programs for low-income families, as well as other forms of social support, education advocates can't afford to sit on the sidelines. And that's why Stand for Schools today signed a letter from anti-poverty advocates in Nebraska to our congressional delegation, urging them to oppose these slash and burn cuts for the most vulnerable Nebraskans. And that's why, in addition to school and community nutrition programs, Stand for Schools supports research-backed policies like expanding early childhood education, career education, and high-quality before and after school and summer programming to help our public schools better serve all students. Another word about equity. Nebraska is one of only 7 states that actually provide more funding for poorer districts than their wealthier peers. And despite the fact that we spend the second least in the country, we rank 49th in terms of state funding to K-12 education, that funding is more equitably distributed among school districts than in any surrounding state. Again, it's not a perfect system, but we're on the right track and we know how to improve it. With the right support from state and local leaders, there is absolutely no limit to what our public schools can achieve. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Okay, reminder to, if you have any questions, write them down and they'll be brought up to the podium. Okay. First question we have is, public schools deal with multiple languages in their schools. How would a charter school handle the multiple language situation?
So, a charter school, and actually on this issue of spending, I have to say that we're 49th in the country is misleading. We spend 10th most when you adjust it on education in Nebraska, but why I lead with that is because most charter schools receive less funding than the traditional district schools. In New York, they only got 75% of what district schools got. And like I said about the Success Academy schools, they're performing much better than the district schools. And they have kids that speak multiple languages too. So it's about practices that are happening in the schools. And again, it doesn't matter if you call it a charter school, a traditional school, or a private school. There are practices that work best for kids. And what we advocate for is that that's what the focus should be on. What works for kids and how do we make that available to the most kids possible?
So what I would note,
Yeah.
Okay. What I would note is that there is a huge range among charter schools for the kinds of students they serve, and those are, choices that they're able to cherry pick in terms of how they manage their school. And there are a lot of cases across the country in the application process. And this is illegal, but it still happens in a very widespread way. For charter organizations to discourage, in one way or another, certain kinds of students from applying to their school that they don't want to serve, frankly, because those students are more expensive. To Katie's point, in New York, where charter schools are reimbursed 75% of the rate that the state spends per pupil on public school students, that creates an incentive to discourage the most expensive students to educate from applying or from staying in a charter school. Who are those students? They are special education students. They're kids with behavioral problems, with difficult family situations at home. They are exactly the vulnerable students that we all care about in this discussion here today. And so, there are a lot of tricks that some charter schools use, not all, but some charter schools use to discourage, for example, students who speak other languages from applying. You make your application available only in English, and that can significantly impact the pool of students that you're looking to choose from in your lottery in staffing up your charter school. So, there are other charter schools that do focus on, dual language programs, but that's entirely up to the charter management organization, and there is no guarantee from a school district perspective that, charter schools are going to spring up in the ways that communities need them to fill the needs that exist.
Well, one of the best things about charters is families can choose them. No one's forced to go to one. So if a family, and again, we believe that parents should be the ones to choose, think a school will teach their child better, then that's an option that's available to them. I want to talk about, because Ann mentioned Success Academy again, which I'm glad about. Like I said in my remarks, for every 15 kids that are applying in the Bronx, there's only one spot available. They cannot discriminate who gets that spot. It's a public, open, free lottery. Everyone whose name goes in has an equal chance of being pulled. And what we are seeing, because they've been around long enough, Success has and other charters, is we can track the progress of the child who was lotteried in and the child who was lotteried out. And we are talking about years of differences in learning in some cases depending on that choice that happened. And one of the best things about charters too is that if they aren't working, they close. And if they're doing things that are illegal, the state actually does authorize and regulate charter schools, so elected officials at the state level are in charge of that. But we have illegal things going on in Nebraska all the time in schools, just FYI. OPS, if you're talking about higher graduation rates, OPS at times told kids to stay home because if you keep coming to school, you might keep failing your test and then we can't let you graduate. It's called grade freezing. And so you might have 88% of kids graduating now, but only 23% of kids that go to Metro Community College are prepared to succeed. So
okay.
I'll end with that.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, next question. Now this is to Ann. If only 3 of the 87 get the priority designation, how do we help the students in the other 8 schools who only get 1 slot at third grade?
I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but I think what that question is getting at is the needs improvement designation that the state puts on some schools that are challenged. So under AQuest, which is the state school accountability system, schools are designated into different categories based on their performance, the lowest of which is needs improvement. I believe there are 87 schools in that category. 3 of them are eligible to receive targeted resources and help from the state. The reason it's only 3 is because that's all the funding the legislature appropriated to help. So that's a question for your state legislators, and I would urge you to ask it and forcefully.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is all a new accountability system that's supposed to replace No Child Left Behind, because when No Child Left Behind passed in 2002, they said by 2015, all kids in public schools, regardless of race, regardless of income, are going to be proficient in math and reading. And that has not happened. And so we had this push by people, again, protecting the status quo, that those expectations should be lowered, and lowered specifically for low-income kids and kids of color. So the state created this new accountability system, and I believe it's a misnomer that it's called accountability, because what they want is more money to fix failing schools when we know more money is not going to solve the problem. Again, Nebraska spends, depending if you consider cost of living, in the top 15% of all schools in the country. And we have the biggest achievement gaps between black and white students in the country as well. In 2013, black 8th graders in Nebraska scored worse on the National Assessment for Math than did their peers, black students in 8th grade, in any other state in the country. I really hope that resonates and concerns people in this room. And so this idea that we have 87 failing schools, and I'm not afraid to say schools are failing. If I had a child, I would not choose a failing school, and that's how I believe I would see it. They do not need more money necessarily. That is not going to fix the problem. There's a school in Grand Island. It's called Wasmer Elementary. And a few years ago, I was talking to a reporter. I don't see him here. And I told him this is one of the highest poverty schools in the country, or sorry, in the state. And it's performing better than every school in Westside. I think at that time, better than most schools in Millard, better than schools in Elkhorn, and throughout the state. And he asked, well, what's going on? And I said, wouldn't it be nice if someone asked that question? So he went out and he interviewed the principal, and it was on the front page of the paper, and unfortunately she left, and what happened when she left is their scores went down, by the way, because people working in schools do matter. She said, when No Child Left Behind passed, I thought we had to be 100% proficient. And so we have no excuses for why kids can't learn. They can be poor, they can come from English language learning backgrounds, they can have special education designation, but they are going to be proficient in math and reading by 2015, and they were darn close to that 100% proficiency.
Next question. Nebraska has school choice for every public school student, if there is room. How does adding another choice improve on that unless you include private vouchers as well?
Yeah, and again, as I said in my speech, I'm now for all school choice, because the bottom line is there aren't enough good choices for all kids. And until that day, I will fight, again, alongside parents and educators to make that possible. So I just want to be clear, charter schools are public schools, but I and my organization also support all forms of school choice for low-income families in particular. Some people will say, and when former Commissioner Breed was asked this a few years ago, he said, we don't need charter schools because they don't do any better than district schools, which, if you remember, that was the second excuse before it's no longer in question that they do. And people in Nebraska can already choose to go to any school they want. So we looked into a little data, such as if you are zoned to Nathan Hale Middle School, and I don't think many parents would argue, especially those who are trying to get out, including my cousin who has 2 kids, that it's failing. It was failing. I hope it's improving. If you're zoned there and you want to go to Alice Buffett, and I'll go back on my family right now because my cousin has 2 kids and this is the case, there are no spots at Alice Buffett Middle School. There aren't any, and OPS will confirm that. And talking about the privilege that comes with supposedly you get some sort of it comes down to privilege, that charter schools, again, they cannot be selective in who gets in when they have open spots. No rule in Nebraska on that on public schools. I can't tell you how many people have told me, yeah, there wasn't a spot at Alice Buffett Middle School, or there wasn't a spot at Dundee Elementary School, but my friend, my aunt, works over at the TAC building, so I made a phone call. That's well, it's just not against the law yet in Nebraska.
So I do want to point out that this conversation is bigger than just Omaha, and I think that's something we need to keep in mind. So Nebraska does have open enrollment statewide. So any student can attend any school in the state that has space available. That's pretty amazing. As far as I'm aware, it's fairly unique in the country. And it is great. Now, Katie is right that there are schools in some districts that are full and are not able to accept additional students. I would make the case that that's exactly why we need to focus on strategies that improve all public schools. Again, let's imagine even for a minute that we had charter schools and vouchers in Nebraska, more than 90% of our kids would still be in public schools. That's a Band-Aid, that's not a solution. And so instead, we need to talk about taking what works, whether it's from charter schools or other models across the country, and integrating it into our public schools here. That's exactly what OPS and other districts are working on, and it's something we need to support.
You know, I was thinking the other day, and there's a lot of stuff I left out in this speech, but one thing I did say is charter schools don't hurt kids in public schools, in traditional schools. Nothing shows that they do. But what hurts is a family that has no good options. So I want the traditional schools to succeed. We support all kinds of policies targeting traditional schools so they can adopt the practices that are working in other traditional schools or charter schools or private schools. That said, so they can't, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but anyway, I apologize. I had a really good point on that. Yeah, anyway.
Okay.
I'll let you know if I think of it.
All right. Okay, next question. If I paid tax dollars for public education, will the charter school have an elected school board? If not, is that taxation without representation?